for the rules. And I started looking out there on Content World, and luckily enough, got to talking to Bill Burns, excuse me, and Greg Lawback, who behind the scenes had already been doing some both design work and also talking about some rules they thought needed updating. So I actually looked up, got them on board with the idea of that maybe we could get Richard to look at something. A year goes by while we're moving these rules around and trying to look at what we'd like to see. I go back down to see Richard and I said, all right, here are the rules. I'd like for you to take a look. And he says, no, that's okay. I'm sure we're good, basically. And he says, let me tell you what you're going to do for me. He says, you're going to redesign Bloody April. What had occurred to me at that point is I just got recruited into designing a game, and I've never designed anything, I don't think. And I was busily trying to say I wasn't qualified, but he said, yeah, no. He says, I've read your emails. You got plenty of talent, which I'm not sure how a nice email qualifies as game design, but I think he was looking for someone he had leverage with. And he basically made me an offer I couldn't refuse.
Yeah,
I didn't
very Godfather-like.
Yes, very much so. I felt like it at the time. But the nice thing, I came back and basically said, all right, we've got the go-ahead. Well, another couple of, I guess a year and a half went by. I've been working on the game. We've been working on the rules. And we got to basically a loggerhead because Richard had still felt very strongly about, his system. There were other people involved who were reluctant to see some of the changes. And I've spent my whole life dealing with generally small business, where I'd run into the business owner and I'd present him with whatever I thought were good ideas, and I didn't have to go through committees. That's what I was used to. And I thought to myself, if I could get into that type of position, this rule changing would happen a good bit quicker and a little bit smoother. So I got to thinking about Richard and where he was now, and he's not practicing law. He's down there in Charleston. And I said, if I left him with the dividends, or not the dividends, but the royalties from the game, but just asked to buy the rights to the game, I thought he might like that idea. And I made it enough money that it caught his attention, and he agreed. And a month later, or maybe it was 2 weeks later, we had the contract signed. I insisted at the time, Richard was just going to make it between himself and I, but I insisted on including GMT because they wanted first refusal. I had spoken to Tony at GMT a while back, and he said, well, we just want to make sure we have first rights. And so I got them involved so there wouldn't be any question. So that's how it all got done.
Wow. I listening to you tell that story, and when you mentioned when you first drove down there to Charleston to talk to him, it was kind of about rules changes and things like that. And I'm thinking, wow, so he didn't even broach the idea of buying the rights right away. So I'm thinking that must have been a kind of hold your breath and see what happens moment when you finally broach the subject.
It was, but I thought I had talked to Richard enough to, and he was designing games as a living now. So yeah. I thought perhaps this was a win-win. I mean, if he could get a lump sum up front, again, keep all the royalties. The only thing I was asking for was the intellectual rights to make and to be able to make decisions about the game system. And
wow.
So again, he was very, like I said, I just think he was in a position in life. He liked that idea, and hopefully This was only maybe 8 or 9 months before he passed. I hope he had a chance to go out to dinner every single night and spend every bit of that money, because I know when he first got the check, he says, well, we're going out tonight and we're celebrating at a nice restaurant. And I said, hey, that's great by me. Glad to hear it. So hopefully it was well used and he got the most use out of it before he did pass.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I would have thought if you had asked me before you went down there about your idea and your plan, not even knowing the man, I would have still said there is no way in hell that Richard Berg is ever going to sell the rights to TSS. But you never know. If you
You
don't
never
ask,
know.
you don't get.
Right place, right time, and I think as Richard made me an offer, I couldn't refuse. I think on the back end, I made him an offer that he couldn't see refusing. Let's see that. I think it was very attractive to him, and again, it got what he needed for the time. So
Yeah.
all that.
Well, it's very interesting that asking you to redesign Bloody April was kind of like, I don't know, the equivalent of a brigadier sending the entire brigade charging into a improved position with bristling with Napoleons and all kinds of things in the way and abadis and all that kind of stuff. That's the idea of subject. But that makes for a very good segue into the next thing I wanted to chat with you about, and that is your not Bloody April, but Into the Woods project. And as a way of introducing Into the Woods, in the last few months, GMT put the game on P500, and if I recall, it got through the first 500 pre-orders inside of 2 or 3 days, was it?
It was quick, very quick.
Quick. I thought that Death Valley, its predecessor, went pretty quick, and that took maybe, I think 3 weeks. Maybe Bill Byrne can correct us on that if he's listening. I thought it was about 3 weeks, and it got a good surge, and then it kind of stopped at around 350 for a little bit, and then it just kind of inched its way into 500. And I thought back then that was still relatively quick, but I had no idea how quick it was until Into the Woods just blazed through, and that was really, really fast. So give us a short rundown on Into the Woods and what your idea for it is, and I'll pop up the screen here with.
All right. And what we're looking at here are starting positions for the Confederates, and their initial lines there. And they're about to run headlong into the detachments from Prentice's division, specifically Peabody's brigade. And you'll notice that the coloration I've used here, first of all, I've used light woods, and the light woods is there for 2 reasons. A, that at this battle, the woods were in early spring and weren't as thick as a lot of the woods of other battles during the war. And the other reason was aesthetics, and just want to be able to see the terrain changes. I've used a 20-foot terrain contour, which I thought was sufficient to hide any units if you have a hill of that size, and use that. So there's a number of contours there. And talking about how fast Into the Woods went to P500, there were a couple of reasons for that. One of them is that Bloody April, or the Battle of Shiloh, has always been a favorite with the Great Battles crowd. And so it was almost a done deal, regardless of how it was done. However, the Death Valley that Greg Lawback designed really paved the way, because I can see any number of people who have joined the Great Battles ranks from both that excellent design. And keep in mind, Greg Lawback has designed more Great Battles, although they've only been in 2 boxes so far, than anyone else. And that other than Berg himself. So we're lucky to have him. And again, that really kind of led into this. And I've got a question on screen that says, Alex Barney says, can you talk about the process of designing a game? The idea phase, how to make a map, and what goes into the process? Sure. I don't know how interesting everybody finds it, but as soon as Richard told me I was going to design this, I knew I had a couple of problems. One of them is the research, and I'm a guy that I'm not a great researcher. I like reading history, but to actually get into something and do what a great many of the historians do, which just take copious notes and get into it, I knew that wasn't there. Fortunately, Berg said, I want this to be, basically a republishing of Bloody April. So Bloody April was out there and gave me some ideas. A Fearful Slaughter from Dave Powell and the Gamers was out there. So I had some material to kind of say, okay, this is how they have approached it. Coming up with the new map, I wasn't happy with either the maps from the old Bloody April or the newer A Fearful Slaughter. So what I did is
it was kind of like the broccoli overcast, I remember, from Bloody April, where the entire map, except for a couple of clearings, was just green woods, that old Simonson Forest thing, and yeah, you couldn't make out anything like contours. There was just nothing else to see but green.
Yeah, there weren't any contours in that game. There was they had basically crests and ridges and along the streams, and for the time it was wonderful. But the resources are now so much greater. I went out and got a park map from Trailheads, which is a company that makes any number of the park maps here. It's a modern map showing all the monuments and locations of headquarters and things, and I digitized that. And that was my working model moving forward. I went in there and hand traced while in. I also learned a pretty significant piece of software, Adobe Illustrator, to allow me to create a map, which I had never done anything like that before. So the digitization, which I got it done down at the local Kinko's or Staples or whatever, was the beginning part, and then I just overlaid my map on top of that. The hardest thing for me in making a map was justifying streams to hex sides and changing terrain to match hex sides. It was painful, but necessary there. I think I'll be a good bit better on the next one, but just didn't know how to, I didn't realize how difficult it becomes for the player if you don't make things clear. So that was probably the hardest thing for me. And the map still shows a great deal of detail. And so it was very happy for me. The nice thing is that the graphics for the map and the counters were all things that Greg Lawback already had in his repertoire. And he had digitized GMT graphics and had used them in his playtest map, and he was ever so gracious in sending these to me, and it made my job a albeit difficult, a whole lot easier than it would have been from scratch.
I concur with that. I have a Illustrator template that has all of the symbology in it, both for the counters and for the maps, and I'm definitely making use of it in some projects that I'm working on myself. It really, really helps to have things looking close to what they'll look like if the game is actually produced. It helps a lot.
It does quite a bit. And it gave me a good feeling about the game early on. I think the other question in there somewhere was, how do you get your ideas? I went out and read a couple of histories on Shiloh almost immediately. And as soon as I got the job, and one of them was the Venerable Bloody April by Wally Sword. And the other one was a newer book called Conquer or Perish by Tim Smith, who's a professor out in Middle Tennessee and has done a wonderful job in even going into more detail than Sword, and he's used updated sources as well. There was an excellent book out there by, I can't remember the first name, but Cunningham, which basically explained the battle in terms I don't think anybody had ever done before, and that was in the late 70s. And Tim worked off his work and then added to it. But what I did is just looked at all the things that went on in these battles and some of the details. The great thing is, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, from Richard Berg to, all the people that have designed GBAC games, Dave Powell, Eric Lee Smith, and last but certainly not least, Greg Lawback, who, I don't know if I say his name often enough, because I don't think, if it was not for Greg being willing to make all these designs, this would have never happened. What I've had, the opportunity I had to buy it would not have worked out anywhere as well as it has. So you just want to look at the ideas out there, and the system itself, all the infrastructure is there, and all you got to do is put the roof on, paint the walls, that kind of thing, and you've got a game. Now the roof better be right, and the walls better be the right color. But I think Into the Woods, and by the way, that's a name that Richard chose, and we're keeping it out of respect for his wishes. It would not have been my first choice, but it is well known now. So hopefully it'll be something that catches everybody's attention when it's out there.
Yeah.
And did I answer all the questions for now?
Yeah. Especially about the map. I can say that I'm working on some projects myself, and I started this whole process by kind of getting roped into doing the vassal modules for Death Valley. And
thank you for that.
I remember we were still wrapping that up, and you sent me an email and you said, hey, I'm going to be working on this reboot of Bloody April, and I need somebody to create vassal modules for the play testing. And I thought, yeah, sure. So, I signed up for that without realizing what I was getting into. And I guess I have kind of become the curator of the vassal modules for the system. So, with that comes the onus that whenever a new project is begun, I'm the person that has to create the vassal modules and also keep updating them, through the playtesting process, which definitely adds a lot of work. But
yeah, I've noticed your workload has gone up, and I apologize for my part in that. But I think it'll make for a better game.
Don't apologize.
Yeah, so
that's just part of the process. It's ideally when you're building a vassal module, you try to work from a game that's already finished and published, so that the ground isn't always moving under your feet. But when it's for play testing, you have to realize that there's going to be change, sometimes very drastic change,
Yeah.
and you just have to roll with it. And I learned a lot of painful lessons about even about Vassal module construction from the Death Valley process. There were a few of the battles in that box that required me to change the mix of efficiency chits, and I had started building into the Vassal module some automated features that kind of made that easier for the players. And not knowing that one particular feature of creating a deck of activation, or I'm sorry, efficiency chits that you draw from every turn was hard coded. And if you change the mix or change the composition of that randomized deck, all of the scenario presets that you created would have to be redone because they would not update. I don't even know why, but that was the case. And so every time something like that changed, like the mix of efficiency, I would have to make all the changes and then recreate any of the scenarios. And if you're familiar with Death Valley, there are 10 battles in the box, and each of those battles usually has at least 2, if not 3 or more scenarios in it. So all of those had to be recreated every time there was a major change like that. So that added quite a bit of work. And then at the very end, right when I thought Charlie Kibler lent his wonderful touch to all of the pieces and the maps. And I have to preface this by saying that the job he did on Death Valley was stellar. I mean, I thought Greg Lawback's maps were print ready during playtesting. I didn't think they would change a thing. They sent it in, submitted it to GMT, and Charlie just made everything pop. And it was just amazing. But what happened as a result of that was I had to reinstall new maps into the modules. And also he changed some of the colors on the counters. So then I had to redigitize the entire counter set for a third time. I had to change all the organizational charts because the key colors for various corps and divisions changed for, I'd say, 2/3 of the units. So those were all old, and all of that had to be changed. So right when I thought I was done, I was in for a couple of months more work, and I was racing against when the game was actually going to appear. And I think I beat it by about a week and a half. And that was pushing it. I got all the modules done and ready for release by the time that GMT started shipping the game. So, yeah.
Congratulations, and I don't know. I think I speak for the entire community. We would not be able to do what we do without your help. So I thank you immensely. One of the nice things about this is that we've really got great people. We have you, and again, we wouldn't be able to do half the play testing that we get done except for your Vassal modules. And someone I mentioned earlier, but haven't mentioned since, is Bill Byrne, who Bill has been both the developer for Death Valley and Into the Woods. He's also the series honcho now. and has really made a difference in how clear and precise the rules are. For virtually every rule you could have a question about, the answer is in there. You might not always see it right off the bat, but it wasn't that many years ago you'd have to go to ConSim and hopefully somebody would answer your question correctly. And Bill has really changed all that. And so we're, excuse me, we're very lucky to have someone of his talents, because again, those are not my talents by any means. I'm more of a 10,000 foot view, let's go get something done, and Bill's the guy who comes and puts all the pieces together and has done an excellent job.
Bill was the guy that kind of changed my own self-view of how well I knew the system. I thought I knew just about everything about the system, and during the Death Valley playtesting, we got together and played on the Vassal server a couple of times, and by the time we would get through a session, I was like shaking my head at myself thinking, wow, I thought I knew this upwards, downwards, sideways, backwards, and every single time I would do something wrong, Bill would go, nope, that's not the way it works, and he would cite the rules case, and he would tell me exactly what I was doing wrong, and I was thinking, okay, he's right.
Yeah.
So yeah, he fell into the job of rules guru very naturally.
Yeah. And we've got a great team. I think this whole everybody who's working on this, from the play testers to you to Bill, and again Greg for all his great designs, is we're very lucky. I don't think there are a lot of systems that have that kind of support, or for that matter, 1,000-member Facebook group, which I thank you for on that. I know we wanted to keep this. Talk about where the system was moving, and I expect everybody's falling asleep if anybody's watching this. Okay, Alex is beating me to the punch. He says, what's the future of great battles? With the average age of the great battle gamer in the 50s, 60s, thanks a lot, how do you plan to try to draw younger guys into the system? Well, there's really two questions there. The future of the system as it relates to players, and the future of the system, and what other battles do we have in mind, and that type of thing. I'm counting on hopefully a turnaround in the folks who like wargaming. I've noticed in Europe, and I don't know if they're behind us, in front of us, but the gamers there are much younger. There has to be a rationale there, and I'd like to try to find out what that is. But hopefully we'll get new folks in. And one of the things I've noticed when I go to war game conventions now, the last two I've gone to, there was a younger crowd there. So I'd like to think we can draw them in. Perhaps in another way, Bill Byrne, I don't know when it'll happen, is using or trying to update what are called the simple rules for great battles. I don't know how long it'll be, because he's got a rather full plate right now, but I think if the system was a little more accessible, we'd have more players. Right now, it's one of the more difficult systems.
That's kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah. So, I love it, but not everybody does. I've got a local group that I think they enjoy it, but it is on the higher end of their spectrum about what they want to do as a group. So we have to keep that in mind. Like I said, hopefully the simple rules will make it a little more accessible. I think what Greg is doing, which Greg is really focused on smaller battles and a series of battles that are in one box. I think that will do more than anything else. I personally like the big battles. I love Three Dog is my current favorite GBACW game, and I've enjoyed Into the Woods during the playtest, and I tend to like that size. So anyway, the smaller battles will help quite a bit. Perhaps more importantly, nice selection there. Good job.
Thank you.
More importantly, what's going forward is you have Greg, and he'll be working on a particular series of battles that are have some connection, much like Death Valley, but they'll be going to be in the East, and I think it'll be an exciting project. And I don't know if this shows up for everybody, but Charles says he's just playing great battles to avenge his great-great-grandmother because the Yankees stole her silver and chickens. Well, considering that's right, you're from Texas originally. That's right. Okay. Hey, at least you've got somebody out there. I can't find anybody on my end. Going forward, I think we're going to be really lucky in that, again, Greg is going to be doing some great games. Past that, GMT has agreed to republish Red Badge of Courage, River of Death, and 3 Days of Gettysburg, all in one massive package. Various people are working on parts of that. I think you know about that. And hopefully that's not more than just a couple of years off. And certainly, hopefully not more than a couple of years after we get ITW out of there. In the meantime, Greg may have his games ready to go. After that, it's kind of up to who wants to design. One of the great things about this is that if there is someone out there and they said, hey, I've always wanted to see this battle, I've always wanted to see, why don't you use this set of rules? Again, one of the nice things, other than flying monkeys, I'm open to almost anybody designing a game and having their personal slant about what would be cool in that game. So if there are people out there, budding designers or someone who just really wants to see a particular battle, I want to invite anybody to get going on that so we can have even more participation from the groups.
Yep, indeed. I know I'm busily working on a couple of projects myself, and the number keeps expanding, but I'm making some slow but sure progress, and who knows, maybe one of these days I'll be having a 9th or 10th or something box release with my name on it. That would be nice. Nice to see.
I like the idea.
All right. So let's see here. Let's go back and talk a little bit more about Death Valley again. When that came out, I know I went online and kind of evangelized this as much as I could, because not many people were really talking about it the way I saw it. But Death Valley historic release, not only for the GBACW system, but for GMT and for wargaming as a whole. I myself cannot think of any other game or set of games, I should say, that has been released anywhere that packed 10 battles into one box. SPI, of course, came out with the quadra game concept and more like a quint game system, because they would usually have a 5th version of their quad system that would be published in S&T magazine. So,
yeah,
5.
I remember.
This doubles that into 10, and even GMT says that there are 8 battles in the box, but really it's 10, because 2 of the battles, that being Cross Keys and Port Republic, can each be played separately, or they can be combined into a kind of end of the Shenandoah 62 campaign battle where, decisions you make on one side of the field affect what goes on the other side. So it really is a separate battle when you combine the two themselves, but allows for either one to be played separately. So the way I look at that nets out into 3 battles and not just 2. So overall, there are 10 in that box, and I just don't know of any other game that has that many standalone battles in one box. And also, as I said earlier, each of the battles usually has at least 2 scenarios or flavors of that battle in it, if not 3 or 4. So the value is just incredible, and for I think it retails for $80. For $80, you can't beat that with a stick.
It is one of the more impressive packages that has ever come out in wargaming. And again, the effort that went into it, both design and development, is amazing. One of the bad things, and there are bad things about this, is having to, it's kind of like having to follow the best act when you're on stage, like
yes,
you got the greatest one out there, and you're having to follow, Frank Sinatra or something here, So I was talking to Gene. I'm sorry.
I said everyone's asking us now to play Freebird.
They're ready. They're ready to go home. But anyway, the bad thing is having to follow a package like that. And one of the things that we had originally wanted to do was to have more than one game inside of Into the Woods. But again, it was Richard's desire to only have one game in there. And by the time it became my decision, we were so far along, it would have pushed the publication out another year or so. But it would have been great to have more than one, but we're looking to have 10 or more scenarios for Shiloh itself. So not quite the package of Death Valley. I don't know if anything will ever match up to that again, but hopefully that will do as much as we can with one battle, and hopefully people enjoy it. Going back to Alex, he was talking about ideas. Most of the chrome in this game has come directly out of the books I've read, and hopefully it gives a feeling for the players of being at Shiloh as much as possible without getting shot at or along those lines.
Yes, I have been kind of watching the playtesting process from my vantage point of just working on the Vassal modules. And one of the things that I have noted with some interest is how you are modifying and bending the rules for line of sight, especially with regards to the trees and the tree canopies to suit this one particular battle. There's some really interesting things coming in there that are really going to, I think, change the view for a lot of system gamers once Into the Woods is released. Can you talk about the Shiloh Light Woods a little bit?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. And hopefully not everybody's heard this 100 times because I know I keep saying it, but the woods at Shiloh, first of all, were typical woods for the time in that where you had farms. You had domesticated animals that freely roamed. And so they'd get out there and they'd clear out the underbrush just as well as a good groundskeeper might in our modern woods. And so you had that going on. In addition, this had been a a rather late and chilly spring with lots and lots of rain. The budding was not even at its normal levels, but it was early that time of year. If you've ever been to Shiloh this time of year, you see what I mean. There isn't a whole lot of budding that was going on there. So we had that going on, and I knew that there probably is a need for light woods there, even though nobody had done it before. What was even more is I read the books in both the infantry fights with small arms and in the cannonades that occurred. There were all these shots that just were not possible without having some type of different rule set. So what we did in this is allowed you to shoot through a single woods hex if there's not other encumbrances in there. And this kind of gave it a good bit more free-flowing, I think, battle than just having to move up adjacent every single time. I think it's helped the play value. On the artillery level, artillery can actually shoot through woods if they're on high enough terrain, and with some fairly severe modifiers, but it does give the shots that were actually happening there. Stewart on the flank of the Union Army talks about seeing, rebel flags 1,000 yards away. He was able to see the men in motion and that type of thing in what is a very wooded area. So I knew that I needed to come up with something. Hopefully it'll meet everybody's approval, or at least a great majority of them. And everybody will enjoy the ability to have the firefights that were historically there.
Yeah. Well, I've read a little bit about Shiloh, and I have to admit that reading some of the anecdotes about the employment of artillery specifically, I was definitely left with the idea that this just couldn't happen because everything is wooded, and the usual line of sight rules kind of harken back to that broccoli overcast from Bloody April, in application. So yeah, it was definitely necessary to be flexible and come up with some other solutions that made sense and also supported the history of the thing, so that it's not just throwing in a different rule just for its own sake.
Yeah, right. History. The other thing that was really helpful for me, and I've been out to Shiloh multiple times, but the last time I went, while I still paid attention to what happened, where the history of it is, I really spent a good bit of time walking the field, and especially the areas that people wouldn't normally walk, and these ravines and these creek beds and that type of thing. I was there during early November. It was relatively warm, and it had been dry for a week, but I sank 6 inches into mud in one of these very small creek beds, and I realized then what they must have been going through. I also went down some of those steep slopes that we have in the game and up. And I would think if anything, at first I was worried that I had made the terrain too difficult on the map, but after walking it, I thought, what, pretty accurate. So hopefully people will see why the battle worked out like it did, because you're going to get pushed in a particular direction in this battle, just like they were in real life. So hopefully people will see that and enjoy that piece as well.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing like visiting these fields and kind of reconciling our maps and our counters and all of that to what's there now. I went on a tour of Virginia a few years ago, and I prepared for it by making a list of specific pictures or vistas that I wanted to take pictures of from, referencing specific X's and directions on the maps. I just wanted to see how accurate is what I see in the 10,000 foot view from the map relative to, where you would stand today. And I have to say, I was very pleasantly surprised that the maps seemed to be borne out for the most part with, what was there. Occasionally, there would be some new forest growth that was blocking some lines of sight, but once you factored in the fact that those trees weren't there in the 1860s, it was very easy to see, um, how relatively accurate our maps are. Um, in fact, the only real surprise that I remember was driving down the Warrenton Turnpike at Manassas, which is now called Lee's Highway, State Highway 29. And I was driving from the Stone Bridge to the Stone House, that one intersection. And the map, has some rolling hills there, but I just was driving along it, and all of a sudden I went way down this steep bank and then right back up again. It was almost like the ride, and there was nothing on the map for Red Badge of Courage or any other map of Manassas I've seen that came close to that. I thought, wow, that I wasn't expecting that at all. But aside from that, Matthews Hill, Henry House Hill, all those things, they were all there. I kind of got in the woods behind Matthews Hill, kind of like the Union did, Burnside did when he was moving up. And yeah, it was really, really interesting to walk through that, and the unfinished railroad bed and some other places like that. It was really interesting to walk through that because after staring at game maps for a while, it's almost like you've already been there. So you know what's around the next corner if the map is accurate, and then sure enough, it is. And you just had this feeling of deja vu, even though it was the first time I had been there. It was very, 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 very interesting.
Yeah, I agree with you on a couple of different levels. Having the game map as always helps you understand the battlefield, or should always anyway. And I found them useful. Perhaps even more of an agreement with you on that, on the maps. And we have to take 3D terrain and turn it into a 2D representation. With that being said, it still ought to be able to, it should be able to show a steep hill and increments that make sense as far as the scale of our games. And so I'm looking forward to the 3 new reprints, because one of the things that we're going to do, the 3 reprints of Three Dog and River of Death and Red Badge of Courage, is we're going to redo all those maps and make the terrain contours about half of what they are now, or perhaps even a little grainier than that. So we should have a much better representation of the terrain. And when you defend Snodgrass Hill, you'll know why you're defending there, as opposed to just having a name on the board, which I think in some of the other games, it just seemed like there wasn't a real reason to be there. And hopefully our new maps will help the players see the historical reasons. So I'm looking forward to them, if nothing else. Plus with, again, I've mentioned Mark Simonich and Charlie Kibler both. I'm looking forward to the work that they do, both on the map boards and the updates to the game systems themselves.
So are you anticipating that the new maps for Red Badge of Courage would have a 10-foot difference in contours?
Uh, I could have some fun with this question, but I'm going to leave it alone. I think they probably have about a 20-foot contour, 20 or 25,
20.
depending on
Right.
what the map maker decides on doing.
Oh, okay.
All right. But I think the part you were talking about, you said, hey, I didn't realize this was such a steep hill in the area I was going through. I imagine it's going to show up very well. And Alex Marney has a comment that says, terrain isn't as tough for us young guys. Yeah, keep thinking that way for as long as you can, Alex. Keep thinking that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see. I'll have to practice up so I can hang with you next bike ride or whatever. But
I don't know about that. Alex is pretty tough.
Yeah,
I remember a few years ago, I was doing this 25 push-ups a day challenge, and I roped Alex into doing some of them, and then he started posting these videos of him doing one-handed push-ups and push-ups using one of those exercise balls, and just making it look like completely easy. I was so mad at him.
yeah, and I don't want to embarrass anybody by showing my video of what I can do. So that's why you haven't seen me out there. It's not that I couldn't do that stuff. I just don't want to embarrass the young guys and
Right.
accomplish here. Anyway, that's the line that I'm sticking to. Listen, we've been doing this for an hour. I expect this is as long as anybody'd like to watch us, but you want to see if there's any questions before we sign off, and other than why can't I hang with young guys out on the battlefield?
All right. So we got a couple people who are tuning in. So are there any last questions for Dick or about the system?
Not everybody at once.
Yep. I think we fielded most of them during the rest of our discussion. However, I did want to wrap up by kind of reprising the beginning, because in my naivete, this is my stream, I didn't actually hit the go live button about 5 minutes in. So I'm going to end this by actually introducing you so that anyone who sees will not be completely thrown off by the fact that we begin this stream kind of mid-conversation. My name is Alan Dickerson, better known as Stiglr in some parts. And today I am having a special guest, Dick Whitaker, and we are going to spend an hour or so talking about the great battles of the American Civil War series, and reminisce a little bit about Richard Berg, and talk about the roots of the system and where it's going in the future. So there we kind of have a backwards intro there, but it'll have to do. So maybe one day I can splice this together in the right order, and we can go from there. So, Dick, it was great having you. I really enjoyed hearing your history of how you got to the leadership role for the series. I think it bodes well for the future of the series that we are kind of in your hands, so to speak. And yeah.
Well, thanks. I'm just looking forward to all the women that are going to follow me around now. I'm still waiting, but I'm sure they're out there now that I'm internationally known for owning great battles of the American Civil War. Hey, listen, I enjoyed it, Alan. Good to see you again. And again, get back to North Carolina so I can buy you a beer. Okay? Take care.
Okay. I'll see you soon.
All righty.